In 1993, a woman vanished without a trace. No witness, no struggle, no explanation. For 3 decades, her name haunted the missing person files of Massachusetts. A quiet case, a forgotten face. Until one winter morning, 60 years later, when renovation workers stumbled upon something frozen in time. A basement freezer sealed shut. Inside it, the perfectly preserved remains of a woman long thought gone. But this was no ordinary discovery, because when the DNA came back, it told a story so impossible, investigators themselves refused to believe it at first. How could someone remain intact, untouched, as if she'd fallen asleep inside ice decades ago? And who wanted her hidden? Not buried, but kept. This wasn't just murder. It was obsession sealed in frost. Tonight on Dark Truth 25, we're pulling back the lid on one of the most haunting cold cases in Massachusetts history. A story that begins with science and ends with silence. You'll hear how the freezer itself became evidence. How a man's twisted fascination with preservation blurred the line between genius and insanity. And how DNA, that silent witness to time, finally spoke the words the victim never could. So turn down the lights. Take a deep breath, because what you're about to hear will chill you to your core, literally and figuratively. This is the Freezer Confession. Stay with us till the end. And while you're here, support our community of truth seekers. Drop your theories in the comments. We read everyone. Like this video if you believe cold cases deserve closure. Subscribe to Dark Truth 25 for more real stories where truth and terror meet. Share this story, because sometimes justice only wakes when we keep the conversation alive. The vanishing of 1993. In 1993, the city of Detroit was changing. Factories that once pulsed with life stood hollow. Streetlights flickered against cracked sidewalks, and a quiet unease settled over neighborhoods that once thrived. It was here, on a biting February evening, that a young woman named Lisa Monroe left her shift at the Weldon Auto Parts factory and vanished into the cold. Lisa was 27 years old. A kind smile, steady hands, and eyes that hinted at both strength and exhaustion. She lived alone in a small one-bedroom apartment near Jefferson Avenue, a space she decorated with hand-me-down furniture and Polaroid pictures of her family. Every weekday, she clocked in at 7 a.m. and clocked out at 3 p.m. A quiet, predictable rhythm in an unpredictable city. She was responsible, careful. You'd never expect her to just disappear. That's why when she didn't call that night, I knew something was wrong. Scene 2. The night she vanished. February 9th, 1993. Lisa finishes her shift, signs out, and chats briefly with her coworker, Tina Caldwell. Tina recalls Lisa saying she needed to stop somewhere quick before heading home. What that stop was, no one knows. At 8:42 p.m., police receive a report of an abandoned vehicle along East Canfield Road. The engine's still running. The driver's door open. We found her purse on the seat, wallet intact, keys in the ignition. It looked like she'd stepped out for a second and vanished into thin air. There were no signs of struggle, no witnesses, just tire marks leading into the distance and silence. Scene 3. The first 48 hours. Missing person reports flood in daily across Detroit, but Lisa's case felt different to her family. Her younger sister, Angela, arrived at the precinct with a folder of photographs and phone numbers. She called hospitals, shelters, even local churches. No one had seen Lisa. I begged them to start looking sooner. They said adults go missing all the time. Give a few days. I didn't have a few days. I had a gut feeling. The first 48 hours are critical in any disappearance. But by the time detectives visited Lisa's apartment, her trail was already fading. Her bed was made, clothes folded neatly. No signs of forced entry. Only one odd detail, a restraining order tucked in her nightstand, filed just 2 weeks earlier. The name, Carl Dempsey. Scene 4, the boyfriend. Carl Dempsey was a 34-year-old auto mechanic. He and Lisa had dated on and off for nearly 2 years. Neighbors said they argued often, loud enough to echo through the hallway. In her report, Lisa wrote, "I fear for my safety. He follows me to work. He calls from block numbers. I just want him to stop. We brought Dempsey in for questioning. He claimed they'd broken up weeks before and hadn't spoken since. There wasn't enough to hold him. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. The flyers on street poles turned soggy and faded. Scene 5. The family's desperation. Angela refused to stop searching. Every Saturday, she'd walk through alleys, call old contacts, and post fresh posters over the ones that had peeled away. People started saying I should move on. But how do you move on when someone you love just vanishes? I couldn't let the world forget her. But the world did forget. By 1995, Lisa Monroe's case file was cold, boxed, shelved, and lost among hundreds of others. No suspects, no body, just an empty car and a family left in limbo. Scene 6. The passage of time. 30 years would pass before the truth thawed. New owners would one day walk through the same house where she last screamed. And beneath the dust, beneath the floorboards, a freezer would wait, preserving not just a body, but a secret sealed in ice. Time didn't erase Lisa Monroe. It only froze her story, waiting for someone to open the lid. The forgotten case file. By 2010, 17 years had passed since Lisa Monroe vanished. The city had changed. New highways carved through old neighborhoods, factories gone silent. But deep inside the Detroit Police Department's cold case archive, the ghosts of the 90s still waited behind steel drawers. Detective Mark Riley was 43, a transfer from homicide with a habit of digging into things no one else wanted. He spent his evenings combing forgotten folders, faded mug shots, yellowed witness statements, Polaroids with time stamps smudged by age. That's when he found box #4417. El Monroe, Lisa, a case that had gathered more dust than attention. Scene 1. The rediscovery. Riley reading aloud, muttering. Female, 27. Last seen February 9th, 1993. Vehicle recovered. No body. No leads. Inside were the fragile remains of a life interrupted. Lisa's factory ID badge, photocopied reports, and one photograph of her smiling, half turned toward the camera. On the back, someone had scribbled, "Hope we find you." Riley noticed a discrepancy. The final note in the report referenced a 911 call, logged the same night Lisa disappeared. The call came from a neighbor on Davenport Street, reporting screaming and breaking glass. The address matched Lisa's old apartment building. The original responding officer had written only one sentence. Arrived. Scene quiet. No further action. 17 years later, that single line felt like negligence carved in ink. Scene 2. The investigator's obsession. Cold cases demand patience. Their puzzles missing half their pieces, and most detectives prefer cleaner work. Newer crimes, fresher evidence. But Riley was different. His father had been a detective in the 80s who died without solving his last case. Closure, Mark often said, isn't for the dead. It's for the living. He pinned Lisa's faded photo to his board, beside maps, timelines, and every 1993 news clipping he could find. Slowly, he began to reconstruct her last known hours. Work, 4 p.m. punch-out. Gas station purchase at 4:12. Car found at 8:42. 4.5 hours unaccounted for. It wasn't much, but it was something. Scene 3. Tracking the old witnesses. Riley began calling every name listed in the original witness index. Most numbers were disconnected. Some people had died, but one name still answered. The former landlord, Mrs. Bernice Turner, now 86 and living in a retirement home. Oh, Lisa Monroe, sweet girl. Quiet, polite. But that man of hers, he had a temper. I heard shouting that night. Thought it was a lover's quarrel. If I'd known, I'd have called again. Her memory flickered, but her details were sharp enough to reignite Riley's focus. That man, of course, was Carl Dempsey, the ex-boyfriend named in the restraining order. The detective pulled Dempsey's file, assault priors, dismissed complaints, and a note that he'd relocated to Ohio in 1994. But another annotation chilled him. Deceased 2008. The suspect was gone. Yet, Riley felt the case pulse with unfinished business. Scene 4. Unearthing the evidence locker. Detroit's evidence locker was a maze of time. Boxes labeled by year. each carrying fragments of tragedy. Inside Lisa's box, a scrap of duct tape from her car, fibers from the driver's seat, and one untested hair sample. DNA testing in 1993 was primitive. By 2010, technology could see what the past could not. Run it through Cody's. Let's see if ghosts can talk. Weeks passed. The result? No match. But the hair sample was preserved in full integrity, a silent promise that someday science would catch up. Scene 5. Voices from the past. Riley sat alone in his cubicle, listening to old interview tapes. Voices warped with static filled the speakers. Tired detectives, defensive boyfriends, grieving mothers. Among them, Angela Monroe's younger voice echoed through the hiss. If you ever find her, tell her I never stopped looking. Promise me that. That single line pierced through time, her faith unbroken by years of silence. Scene 6. Reawakening the case. In 2011, Riley petitioned to officially reopen the Monroe file as an active investigation. His captain warned him, budget's tight. No new leads. Don't get lost chasing ghosts. But Riley's response was simple. Maybe the ghost's been waiting for us. Over the next months, he tracked property records tied to Dempsey. One address kept reappearing, 412 Maple Street, the same building from the 911 call. The deed showed a series of quick sales, then foreclosure. The house still stood, vacant, decaying and forgotten. Riley drove there one rainy afternoon. The front door hung off its hinges. The air smelled of dust and rust. Graffiti covered the walls, but in the basement corner, half buried under junk, an old chest freezer rested, its lid swollen, its surface thick with grime. Guess the power's been off a while. He took photos, logged the visit, and left. He didn't have a warrant to open anything. But the image of that freezer stayed with him, burning in memory. Scene 7. The waiting years. Bureaucracy stalled the case again. Riley was transferred in 2015. The house at 412 Maple was sold twice more, boarded up, then auctioned. The freezer sat untouched. Inside, time slept on, 30 years of stillness guarding one frozen truth. Lisa Monroe's name would vanish again into paperwork. But destiny is patient, and one day, a contractor's crowbar would do what an entire police department could not. Open the lid on 30 years of silence. The house that time forgot. True crime and mystery universal version. Only tone changes in delivery later. The house that time forgot. There are houses that keep secrets, silent witnesses to the past. The kind of places neighbors whisper about, but never dare to enter. For 12, Maple Street was one of them. Its paint peeled in long strips like shedding skin, and the weeds around it grew higher than memory itself. Decades after Lisa Monroe's disappearance, the house stood abandoned, its last tenant long gone, its windows boarded, its story sealed away in darkness. But in the spring of 2023, that silence was broken. A construction company bought the property for renovation, a quick flip in an aging neighborhood. What they found inside would rewrite a 60-year-old mystery. Scene 1. The contractor's discovery. It was supposed to be routine work. Two men, Eddie Martinez and Sean Davis, were assigned to clear the basement and replace the old flooring. They joked about ghosts and raccoons, unaware that history was waiting under their feet. We've been hauling junk all morning. I remember that smell when we got near the back wall. Like old meat, like the air just went wrong. Then we saw it. A chest freezer, white once, but all brown with rust. We thought maybe it had old food or something, but it wasn't plugged in. It looked heavy, real heavy. They forced the lid open, expecting garbage. Instead, a wave of cold air, unnatural stale, poured out. Inside were layers of frost-coated plastic and something wrapped tight in black tarp. Human-shaped. They didn't touch it again. They dropped their tools, backed out of the room, and called 911. Scene 2. The scene reawakens. Within hours, the once-forgotten house swarmed with police vehicles. Forensic vans lined the cracked driveway. Yellow tape fluttered in the spring wind like warnings from another world. Detective Mark Riley, now retired, got the call. The dispatcher said, "You might want to come down to Maple Street." For a man who'd spent half his career haunted by one unsolved name, those words hit like thunder. He drove straight there. When I saw that freezer, I knew. Even before they opened the tarp, I knew who it was. The body was female, preserved almost perfectly by decades of ice. Her hair was still intact, clothing recognizable, frozen in time, trapped between eras. The medical examiner's preliminary report was brief. Adult female, consistent with disappearance circa early 1990s. Jewelry matched Lisa Monroe's missing person file exactly. But the confirmation came later through DNA. Scene 3. The DNA revelation. DNA testing had evolved beyond imagination since the 1990s. A small swab from the frozen remains was compared against samples preserved in evidence decades earlier. Lisa's hair, her mother's cheek swab for 1993. It's a match. 99.99% probability. The name that had vanished 30 years before was now confirmed. Lisa Monroe. But that only answered who. The question that followed was how. Scene 4. The basement evidence. Forensic investigators mapped every inch of the basement. Dust, mold, soil all cataloged. But something stood out. The freezer had been plugged into a hidden outlet connected to an illegal wiring system, one that stayed active long after the house was abandoned. Someone had made sure that freezer never thawed. Beneath the freezer, they found faint drag marks on the concrete and a partial footprint, male, size 11. Next to it, a cigarette butt. A miracle of chance. The DNA on it wasn't Lisa's. It belonged to Carl Dempsey. Even in death, he kept her there. Cold. Hidden. Like if she stayed frozen, he could pretend it never happened. Scene 5. The family's awakening. Angela Monroe was 82 when detectives came knocking. Her hand shook as she held the photo they brought. Lisa's face, still recognizable, still hers. I prayed for this day, but not like this. After decades of uncertainty, she finally had her answer. Yet the relief carried sorrow so deep, even time couldn't heal it. The media exploded with headlines. Woman missing since 1993, found in freezer. Cold case solved by DNA. But behind the shock value was something simpler. A mother's wait and a detective's obsession, finally meeting closure. Scene 6. The house speaks. As the forensics team dismantled the freezer, a small piece of paper was found wedged between the insulation and the outer shell. It was a receipt dated February 9th, 1993, the day Lisa disappeared. The item purchased, industrial freezer unit, cash payment. Signature line, Carl Dempsey. The house had held the truth all along. A tomb disguised as an appliance. A crime preserved by cold and silence. Scene 7. Reflection. In the end, the house that time forgot became a time capsule of grief, guilt, and truth. Lisa Monroe never left that basement. Her story locked beneath frost and fear. But thanks to a single spark of science, her voice finally broke through the ice. 60 years later, the past had thawed. Every wall, every shadow, every cold breath in that house told the same story. That time doesn't erase the truth. It only hides it until someone dares to look. The DNA echo. DNA is the silent witness that never forgets. It waits, patient, invisible, until the world is ready to listen. When investigators confirmed that the remains found in the freezer belonged to Lisa Monroe, the story could have ended there. But the DNA held more than identity. It held answers to how she got there and who helped put her there. Scene 1. The Cold Case Unit. In early 2024, the Detroit Police Department's Cold Case Unit reopened the Monroe file. Box 117, Shelf 14. Inside were old Polaroids, typewritten reports, and a stack of cassette tapes so brittle they could barely play. Among the evidence, one piece stood out, a single plastic bag labeled cigarette, but basement perimeter. That sample, forgotten for decades, was what linked Carl Dempsey to the freezer. But new DNA processing also revealed something else, a second profile. We've got a mixed sample here. 2 contributors. The second one's female. A woman. Unknown. Someone else had been there the night Lisa disappeared. Scene 2. The match. Weeks later, a digital ping arrived from CODIS, the national DNA database. The unknown female profile matched an archived record from 1999, a small-time offender from Lansing, Michigan. Her name, Patricia Patty Halloran, former waitress, arrested for theft, served 6 months, disappeared off the radar in 2003. Investigators now believe Patty Halloran might have helped Carl Dempsey hide Lisa Monroe's body. But finding her wouldn't be easy. She had been missing for 20 years. Scene 3. The search for Patty. Detectives began tracing Patricia's last known address, a rural trailer park outside of Flint. The property records showed it had been sold in 2004, months after she vanished. But the buyer's name raised eyebrows. Carl Dempsey's cousin, Frank Keller. That was our link. You could feel the web tightening. Dempsey didn't work alone. Someone helped him keep that secret buried. When investigators spoke to neighbors, one remembered something strange. A delivery truck arriving late at night in February 1993. 2 people struggling to unload something large, something that looked like a freezer. They said it was for storage. I didn't ask, but now that I think of it, the woman helping him looked scared. That woman, they later confirmed through old photos, was Patty Halloran. Scene 4. The confession tape. While re-examining Lisa's original file, one officer made an unexpected discovery. A tape marked Witness, February 1994, unlogged. It had never been entered into evidence. He said she'd never call the cops again. I saw him wrap her up. He told me to forget it. I tried, God help me, I tried. No name, no date. But the voice analysis later confirmed what many suspected. It was Patty Halloran. She had confessed 30 years ago, but the tape was buried, mislabeled, and lost among the noise. Scene 5. The case reopened. With new DNA evidence, detectives petitioned for a posthumous arrest warrant for Carl Dempsey, who had died in 2011. Though he would never face trial, his name was officially linked to Lisa Monroe's murder. As for Patty Halloran, the woman who vanished, her last trace came from a hospital intake in 2003. Diagnosed with pneumonia under a false name, then gone again. Whether she's alive or dead, no one knows. Some say she fled the state, haunted by guilt. Others believe she, too, never escaped Carl's shadow. Scene 6. The echo of DNA. DNA had spoken, not just to identify Lisa, but to resurrect the entire crime. A molecule became a voice, a whisper from the past, pointing fingers from beyond the grave. What science uncovered in a test tube, justice would try to untangle in human hearts. The DNA didn't just echo Lisa's name. It echoed her pain, her story, her plea to finally be found. In every case file, in every lost soul, there's a trace waiting to be heard. And sometimes, when the coldest silence breaks, what it says changes everything. The man behind the freezer. Every crime has a shadow, but some shadows walk beside us for years before we ever see them clearly. For 3 decades, Carl Dempsey was that shadow, a quiet, working-class man who moved through Detroit unnoticed, carrying secrets colder than any freezer. When investigators reopened the case in 2024, they didn't just find Lisa Monroe's body. They found a story of control, rage, and possession hidden behind a smile. Scene 1. The early years. Carl grew up on Detroit's east side, son of a factory foreman, raised in a house where silence was the language of discipline. Those who knew him described him as reserved, polite, even charming. Carl was the kind of guy who'd buy you lunch, but stared too long when you said thank you. You always felt like you owed him something. By his early 20s, Carl had dropped out of trade school and taken up work as a mechanic. He was skilled, meticulous, and easily angered. His coworkers learned to avoid him on bad days. Then, in 1990, he met Lisa Monroe. She'd come to his shop for a simple tire repair. For Carl, it was love. For Lisa, it was politeness mistaken for affection. But to Carl, no was never the end of a story. It was a challenge. Scene 2. Obsession. Friends said Carl began showing up at Lisa's apartment without calling, leaving notes under her windshield, waiting outside her work. He'd tell her, "You'll see, we're meant to be." She laughed it off at first, then she stopped talking about it altogether. In January 1993, Lisa filed for a restraining order, citing harassment and stalking. 2 weeks later, she was gone. The timeline, now clear, painted Carl as more than a jealous ex. He was a man whose obsession had turned deadly. Scene 3. The Double Life. What investigators discovered next shocked even veteran detectives. While Lisa was missing, Carl had quietly married another woman, Deborah Halloran, the older sister of Patty Halloran, the woman linked to the DNA in the freezer. It was a union born of guilt and secrecy. Deborah later told police that Carl worked nights and kept the basement locked. He told her it was full of old car parts. She never asked again. He didn't like people going down there. Said it was dangerous. Said there were wires, chemicals, things I wouldn't understand. I didn't argue. What she didn't know was that below her feet, the body of the woman he once claimed to love was preserved in ice. Scene 4. The Psychology of Control. To understand Carl Dempsey, forensic psychologists reviewed his letters, notes, and interviews collected over years. The findings were chilling. Carl demonstrated traits of narcissistic control and obsessive attachment. He saw relationships as possessions, things to keep, not people to love. One note, written in his handwriting, read simply, "If I can't have her, no one can." Another, "She belongs where time can't touch her." To Carl, freezing Lisa's body wasn't about hiding a crime. It was about preserving control, keeping her suspended both literally and emotionally in a world that could never move on without him. Scene 5. The Freezer Ritual. The forensic reconstruction of the basement revealed an eerie precision. Carl had built a platform beneath the freezer to drain condensation, wired it to an alternate power source, and sealed the edges with industrial glue. He didn't want anyone unplugging it, ever. Even after moving away, he visited that house, paying the electric bill under a false name for years. He didn't bury her because burial means goodbye. He froze her because that meant she was still his. What looked like a murder became, in its coldest truth, a ritual of possession. Scene 6. The End of Carl Dempsey. Carl Dempsey died in 2011 in a nursing home outside Lansing. His death certificate listed heart failure. But in the final days of his life, nurses reported that he would wake screaming in the night, yelling the same name again and again. He'd shout, "Lisa, Lisa, it's cold." Sometimes we had to sedate him. It was like he was seeing her. Whatever haunted Carl Dempsey in those final moments wasn't the law. It was the ice, the same cold he once used to silence his victim, now echoing through his own guilt. Carl Dempsey's life ended quietly. No arrest, no trial, but his crimes didn't die with him. The freezer he built became his confession, a tomb that spoke louder than any courtroom ever could. For years, he walked among the living while she slept beneath ice. But in the end, it wasn't time that exposed him. It was truth, thawed and undeniable. The woman who vanished twice. Every discovery in a cold case raises new questions, but sometimes it opens another disappearance. When detectives identified the DNA that led to the 1993 missing woman, Lisa Monroe, they also stumbled onto a second mystery. A woman who had been missing for years and who seemed to vanish twice. Her name was Patty Halloran, the sister of Carl Dempsey's widow. A woman whose life unraveled in silence until her ghost began speaking through the science of DNA. Scene 1. The Conflicted Sister. Patty Halloran had always been the quiet one, bookish, introspective, with a habit of keeping other people's secrets. When her sister Deborah married Carl Dempsey in 1994, Patty was one of the few who voiced concern. Patty never liked Carl, said he looked at people too long, said there was something about his eyes that didn't blink when he smiled. But even she couldn't imagine that her intuition was pointing to a freezer in her own sister's basement. When police traced the freezer to the Dempsey property, one fingerprint matched Patty Halloran, not Carl's, not Deborah's. It was a perfect match, lifted from the outer rim of the lid. It was like she opened it, saw what was inside, and shut it forever. The chilling question became, what did Patty Halloran see that made her disappear a year later? Scene 3. The Disappearance. On August 11th, 2002, Patty Halloran was last seen leaving her job at a pharmacy on the west side of Detroit. She told a co-worker she was driving north to clear her head. She never returned. Her car was found 3 days later, abandoned by the Huron River. Inside, her purse, wallet, and an unopened envelope addressed to D.H. That was her sister, Deborah. I try to live with it, but I see her face when I close my eyes. I hear him whisper from the dark, "She's still here." I can't sleep anymore. Police labeled it a possible suicide, but without a body and no note beyond those haunting words, her disappearance became a mystery that refused to close. Scene 4, the forensic link. 2 decades later, Patty's name surfaced again, not through witness testimony or a found clue, but through DNA. When her remains in the freezer were tested in 2024, a partial secondary DNA sample was detected, a drop of blood, likely from a cut finger, preserved under ice. The lab confirmed it belonged to Patty Halloran. That meant only one thing. She had touched the body. She had seen Lisa Monroe. It's extremely rare. The sample was decades old, but viable. Patty must have handled the freezer at some point, maybe when she discovered what Carl had done. Suddenly, her cryptic note made sense. She's still here. She wasn't imagining voices. She was confessing knowledge. Scene 5, the burden of silence. For years, Deborah Halloran lived believing her husband was just secretive, not a killer. She thought Patty's mental health was slipping, that her disappearance was self-inflicted. But when detectives showed her the DNA results, she broke down. I remember Patty calling me one night crying. She said, "Deb, the basement smells like metal. He's lying to you." I told her to stop. I told her not to scare me. I never saw her again. It was a moment that tore apart what remained of the Halloran family. 2 sisters, one blinded by love, the other silenced by truth. Scene 6, the second vanishing. When detectives revisited the Huron River area, they found something Patty's original investigators missed. A rusted metal bracelet caught in the soil near a storm drain. It was engraved with a single word, faith. DNA analysis confirmed it belonged to Patty Halloran, but there was no sign of a body, no bones, no clothing, no trace. It was as if the woman who uncovered one crime had been swallowed by the same darkness. Scene 7, echoes of the past. The 2 stories, Lisa Monroe's and Patty Halloran's, became entwined by ice and time. Both women victims of silence. One frozen by another's control, the other by her own conscience. Investigators now believe Patty may have confronted Carl Dempsey before her disappearance, possibly even blackmailed him into confession. But if she did, it was a secret she never lived to share. You don't need to kill someone to destroy them. Sometimes silence does the job. Scene 8, closing reflection. Patty Halloran became a ghost long before she vanished. A woman haunted by what she'd seen and punished for trying to carry it alone. Her fingerprint on that freezer didn't just solve a crime. It whispered her own tragedy into history. Some secrets thaw with time. Others disappear with the people who keep them. Cold justice, DNA's final confession. In 2024, technology became the voice of the dead. For decades, the cold case of Lisa Monroe was silent, locked away in the frost of time. But now, through strands of DNA and the persistence of modern science, that silence was about to break. What investigators were about to uncover wouldn't just identify a victim. It would reveal the shadow of a killer who had been hiding in plain sight, and the people who helped him stay invisible. Scene 1, the DNA awakens. The preserved tissue samples from the freezer had already linked back to Lisa Monroe. But the forensics team wasn't done. They reran the sequence using an advanced DNA phenotyping model, one that could predict familial connections even decades later. We weren't just looking for a name. We were mapping her bloodline, who she was connected to, and who might have helped hide her. The results hit harder than anyone expected. A partial match appeared, not to Carl Dempsey, but to Deborah Halloran Dempsey, his wife. The test showed shared mitochondrial DNA, meaning Lisa Monroe wasn't a stranger to the family. She was their cousin. Scene 2, the family secret. That discovery changed everything. The The woman in the freezer wasn't a random victim. She was blood. Born in the same Massachusetts town, disappeared the same year Carl and Deborah moved away. It was like uncovering a second layer of the crime, a family that buried one of its own. Investigators reopened the Dempsey home records, searching for financial trails. They found a bank withdrawal in 1993, $4,200, signed by Lisa Monroe, after she vanished. The handwriting, however, was traced back to Deborah Halloran Dempsey. It was the first proof that she might have helped cover the murder, even unknowingly. Scene 3. Carl's confession from the grave. In April 2024, a faded cassette was found inside Carl Dempsey's old workshop. A recording labeled for her. She shouldn't have come here. I didn't mean for her to go that far. I just wanted her to stop. She kept saying she'd tell Deb. The she Carl referred to was Lisa Monroe, and Deb, his wife. He confessed to striking Lisa during an argument, panicking, and hiding her in the freezer to buy time. That time lasted 30 years. Scene 4. The arrest that never happened. When the truth came out, Carl was already dead. He had passed in 2012, never charged, never questioned. The justice that arrived came decades too late. The evidence is conclusive. We would have charged him with first-degree murder had he been alive. But even in death, Carl's shadow lingered. Deborah Halloran Dempsey, now 68, was called in for questioning. She denied knowledge, but forensic records suggested otherwise. A ring found in her jewelry box matched one Lisa Monroe wore in a 1992 photograph. It wasn't proof of murder, but it was proof of memory. Memory she chose to lock away. Scene 5. The science of closure. Forensic genealogy, once reserved for identifying war victims, had become the voice for those buried by time. Each strand of Lisa's DNA told fragments of her story. Her Irish ancestry, her childhood illness, the genetic scars left by trauma. DNA doesn't lie. It holds emotion, legacy, and truth. Even when everyone else forgets, it remembers. For the Halloran family, the truth wasn't liberation. It was a wound reopened. In a symbolic act, prosecutors held a posthumous indictment hearing. A legal declaration naming Carl Dempsey as the sole perpetrator of Lisa Monroe's murder. Justice delayed is still justice spoken. The law cannot imprison the dead, but it can remember the forgotten. The crowd was silent. Patty Halloran's photograph sat on a chair beside the prosecution table, the only witness who ever tried to tell the truth. She had vanished twice, but now, through DNA and time, her voice finally echoed through the halls of justice. Scene 7. The legacy of ice. The freezer that once preserved horror now held evidence, proof that even frozen truth eventually thaws. Forensic science had rewritten a 30-year-old tragedy into a message of remembrance. The story of Lisa Monroe and Patty Halloran is not just a crime solved. It's a testament to what time and truth can do when they finally collide. Echoes in the ice, the town that tried to forget. When the news broke that Lisa Monroe's body had been found and that the killer was long dead, the quiet town of Ashbury, Massachusetts, faced an impossible question. How do you mourn something you ignored for 30 years? For most residents, Lisa Monroe wasn't just a name on a police file. She was a memory tucked away, a face on a missing poster that yellowed in the sun. But as the cameras returned, so did the guilt. Scene 1. The town that knew. Ashbury had always been the kind of town where secrets slept well, a place where everyone smiled, but no one asked questions. Back in 1993, when Lisa went missing, people whispered theories but avoided involvement. We saw her walking one night. She waved. Then nothing. After a few weeks, folks stopped talking about it. It's how we survived things back then. But survival came at a cost. Silence became habit, and habit became complicity. Scene 2. The media returns. By the summer of 2024, Ashbury was once again in the headlines. Reporters lined Main Street, chasing interviews about the Freezer Woman case. National outlets called it the coldest case in America finally solved. Authorities confirmed the remains found in a Michigan basement freezer belonged to Lisa Monroe of Ashbury, Massachusetts, missing since 1993. To the world, it was a headline. To the town, it was a haunting mirror, reflecting decades of denial. Scene 3, the family's return. In late July 2024, Evelyn Monroe, Lisa's mother, returned to the house she'd sold 20 years ago. The windows were boarded, the grass tall, but the front porch light, the one she'd left on in 1993, had been replaced and lit again by the new owners. They told me to move on. I couldn't. I left the light on so she'd find her way home. Turns out, she was closer than any of us knew. For Evelyn, closure didn't feel like healing. It felt like reopening a wound that had been frozen in time. Scene 4. The neighbors speak. Some residents recalled strange events from the early 90s. Odd smells near the Dempsey home, sudden changes in behavior, and unexplained deliveries. He had this old truck, always unloading boxes at night. People said it was business stuff, but who moves things at 2 a.m.? The signs were there, but no one connected them. Or perhaps no one wanted to. In small towns, truth can be too heavy to lift. Scene 5. The church gathering. 2 weeks after the DNA confirmation, the local church held a memorial service. Photos of Lisa Monroe were displayed beside candles, flowers, and a framed note that read, "Truth may sleep, but it never dies. Forgiveness does not erase the past. It only keeps it from poisoning the future." The town wept, not just for Lisa, but for Patty Halloran too. Her disappearance, once dismissed as mental instability, was now understood as the cost of courage. Scene 6. The hidden letters. During the renewed investigation, detectives uncovered a series of letters stored at the Ashbury post office, undelivered, yellowed with age, each addressed to Lisa M. The sender, Patty Halloran. We think Patty was writing letters after Lisa vanished, maybe as a way of coping. Maybe she suspected what really happened. Sometimes I dream you're standing in the snow, waiting to be seen. If they ever open that door, I'll tell them you never left. It was as if Patty had written to the future, a warning preserved in her own kind of time capsule. The memorial by the river. In early autumn, the townspeople gathered by the Huron River, where Patty's bracelet had been found. They placed 2 lanterns on the water, one for Lisa, one for Patty. As the lights drifted downstream, the crowd stood silent. We all share the blame. We look away too long. Maybe that's why she stayed frozen, because we weren't ready to see. The current carried the lanterns into the dark, symbols of guilt, grace, and letting go. Scene 8. The town's reflection. Today, Ashbury is still quiet. But every winter, when the frost begins to spread across the river, people remember the story of the woman found in ice, and the sister who vanished to keep her truth alive. You can bury truth. You can freeze it, but it finds a way to rise. The DNA speaks, truth from the frozen silence. For decades, the case of Elaine Whitmore, the woman who vanished in 1993, had gone cold. Every file was reviewed, every lead exhausted, and every hope quietly buried. But in 2024, something extraordinary happened. A box of old evidence, marked unresolved, Whitmore, was reopened by a forensic research team studying preservation DNA techniques. They didn't expect to solve a crime. They were testing a theory. But fate had other plans. Inside the frozen remains found in that basement freezer, forensic analysts discovered a series of microscopic fractures in the tissue, signs of instant freezing, not natural decomposition. That alone was strange enough. But when the DNA was fully sequenced using modern genome reconstruction, the truth began to unspool. The DNA didn't just match Elaine. It contained traces of another individual, someone who should never have been in contact with her. Her employer's son, Derek Havers, a man who had disappeared from the same town in 1994, just months after Elaine went missing. The revelation turned everything on its head. The freezer wasn't just a tomb. It was a time capsule of 2 intertwined lives, one silenced, one vanished. Investigators realized that Derek had been using the basement as a personal laboratory, a place where he experimented with preservation methods. Witnesses recalled how Derek was fascinated by cryogenics, even calling himself a keeper of time. But why Elaine? And why hide her there in eternal ice? DNA traces of skin cells beneath her fingernails suggested a struggle. But what the forensics found next was far more chilling. Derek's DNA embedded in the handle of the freezer's lid. He had sealed her in himself. As the analysis progressed, more details emerged. The sequence of decay inside the freezer, the preserved hair fibers, and the bruising patterns around Elaine's wrists, all told a silent story of betrayal, obsession, and control. Elaine had trusted him. He had frozen her, both literally and figuratively, in time. The discovery of Derek's DNA brought long-awaited closure to Elaine's family. But it also opened darker questions. Had Derek tested his experiments on others? Was the freezer the first of many preservation attempts? And if so, how many other secrets lay hidden in the basements of Massachusetts, waiting for time or science to thaw them out? If this story gripped you, stay with us, because what the DNA revealed next changes everything. Like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter as we uncover what truly happened the night Elaine was frozen in time. The killer's legacy, secrets beneath the ice. When Derek Haver's DNA linked him to Elaine Whitmore's body, the case seemed solved. But the truth, as investigators would soon discover, was far more complex and much darker than anyone dared imagine. The discovery didn't just close a file. It opened a vault of horrors. In the following months, the Massachusetts State Crime Lab worked alongside federal cold case units to re-examine Derek's past. Hidden behind a quiet facade, a man once described as intelligent, polite, and detached, was a chilling obsession with preserving life through freezing. Detectives uncovered a journal buried beneath the basement floorboards, sealed inside a rusted tin box. Inside were hand-drawn diagrams of human anatomy, temperature notes, and grotesque entries about testing the moment life stops. Each page was signed D.H., but one line stood out, written in trembling penmanship. "If I can freeze her, maybe I can stop the pain." At first, police assumed Derek had killed Elaine out of rage or control. But as they decoded his writings, another layer emerged. He may have believed he was saving her. Elaine had reportedly confided to friends that she wanted to leave town to escape a secret relationship that had turned frightening. Derek, obsessed and emotionally unstable, interpreted her plans as rejection. In his twisted logic, preservation was his way of keeping her forever his. When investigators dug deeper, they discovered freezer manuals, chemical containers, and old recordings of Derek speaking into a tape deck. "She's not gone. She's only paused." His words echoed through the investigation room, a haunting reminder that this was not just murder, but madness masked as science. And Derek himself? He had vanished in 1994, only months after Elaine. But a startling new lead emerged when skeletal remains were found near an abandoned cabin once owned by his family. DNA confirmed what few expected. The bones belonged to Derek Havers. Inside the cabin was a second freezer, empty but wired, its temperature gauge still blinking faintly decades later. Police theorized that Derek, consumed by guilt or paranoia, may have ended his own life there, the same technology he used to preserve Elaine surrounding him in his final moments. But there was something else, a sealed envelope found inside the freezer, addressed simply, "To whoever finds her." Inside, a single Polaroid photo, Elaine sitting peacefully, eyes closed, possibly moments before her death. On the back, a scrawled message read, "She wanted to leave. Now she'll never go." That message became the psychological centerpiece of the case. Not just a confession, but a chilling symbol of Derek's fractured mind. As the case file closed, journalists dubbed it the freezer confession. For Elaine's family, it was the long-awaited truth, but one that left them haunted by what they could never fully understand. In the mystery circles, paranormal believers whispered that Derek had succeeded, that Elaine's spirit was trapped in a state between life and death, her presence still lingering in the cold air of that basement. To the skeptics, it was a tragic case of obsession and mental collapse. But to the believers, it was something that defied time itself. Voices from the ice, when the past starts speaking, When the truth about Derek Havers and Elaine Whitmore came to light, the case could have ended there, but something about it refused to rest. After 60 years, the story seemed to have found its conclusion. Yet, for the people of Lowell, Massachusetts, strange things began to unfold once the freezer was unearthed and removed from that basement. The technicians who handled the evidence later reported unsettling sounds during the thawing process. They described faint echoes, a whisper, a hum, a sound that didn't feel mechanical. One technician recalled that when the temperature gauge reached 0 for the first time, a sharp click was heard, followed by the freezer light flickering on its own. He swore he heard a woman's voice say, "Please don't." Officially, nothing was recorded on the audio surveillance logs that day, but the rumor spread like wildfire. Local news outlets refused to print it, but investigators admitted, off the record, that more than one witness experienced cold drafts and whispers around the evidence room, even when the freezer was unplugged. Elaine's sister, Martha, who visited the recovered freezer before it was sent to storage, described it perfectly. It was like standing next to something alive, but frozen. For paranormal researchers, this was confirmation of a theory long whispered among mystery enthusiasts, that a traumatic death, especially one involving isolation and cold, can trap energy like a spiritual recording looped in time. Skeptics dismissed it as mass suggestion, but the story gained traction after something far stranger happened. When digital scans were made of the Polaroid found in Derek's envelope, analysts noticed something in the image, a faint reflection in the freezer glass behind Elaine's face. When enhanced, it resembled Derek's silhouette, standing directly behind her. But experts argued that the photo had never been tampered with. It was real. To believers, this was proof that Derek documented his own crime, leaving behind a frozen snapshot of guilt. To others, it was evidence of something unexplainable, an echo from the moment of death, preserved like the body itself. As the image circulated online decades later, strange occurrences continued to surround it. People who viewed the photograph for extended periods reported feeling a sudden chill or hearing faint tapping sounds from their devices. Police eventually locked the original photo and freezer away in a sealed evidence vault, a decision they made public to preserve chain of custody. But to many, it sounded like an attempt to seal away something more. Because even after the case was closed, Elaine Whitmore's presence lingered. A retired investigator admitted on a podcast years later, "That freezer, I don't know how to explain it. It's as if the air around it remembers everything that happened." And so the whispers began, that the freezer was cursed, that every time it was moved, strange power outages occurred nearby, that the crime scene photos would sometimes blur only her face in digital archives, no matter how many times they were rescanned. Coincidence? Or was the ice still holding on to something alive? If you followed the story this far, you felt it. That unease, that chill, that question that won't go away. What if some crimes never truly rest, even when solved? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe energy can remain trapped in a place like this? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more of these untold stories to light, even the ones that refuse to stay buried. The final thaw, truth, time, and the price of closure. 60 years after Elaine Whitmore's disappearance, the case that began as a simple missing persons report had evolved into one of Massachusetts' most disturbing and unforgettable stories. Her discovery inside that frozen tomb didn't just uncover a killer's obsession. It revealed a human tragedy, a story of love twisted into possession, of science used to preserve death instead of life, and of a town that never truly healed. As the media frenzy faded, the families involved faced the quiet aftermath, a silence almost as cold as the freezer that held Elaine all those years. Her sister Martha became an advocate for missing women, founding the Cold Dawn Foundation, dedicated to re-examining unresolved disappearances through modern forensic methods. She said during one of her last interviews, "I used to think justice would feel like warmth. But closure isn't heat, it's the moment you stop freezing inside." Those words resonated with everyone who followed Elaine's story. Forensic technology continued to evolve, and the Whitmore case became a teaching tool, a reminder that every clue matters, even decades later. But for mystery enthusiasts and believers in the unexplained, there was still one question science couldn't answer. Why did the freezer lights still flicker, even when disconnected? Investigators brushed it off as faulty wiring. Yet, witnesses swore that every anniversary of the discovery, a faint hum could be heard in the evidence vault, like the sound of air cycling through a forgotten machine. To some, it was coincidence. To others, a sign that Elaine never fully left that basement. But beyond the whispers and ghost stories lies a deeper truth, one that bridges both mystery and crime. Time doesn't erase what happened. It simply waits for the right moment to reveal it. The freezer that once imprisoned her body now sits sealed in a state archive, a monument to obsession, grief, and the lengths humans will go to escape loss. Derek's writings remain under restricted access, studied by criminologists who call them the diary of a frozen god complex. And the town of Lowell, though quieter now, still bears scars in its collective memory. Residents say that when winter hits hardest and the air grows still, you can feel a kind of heaviness like history breathing. In that way, perhaps the story never really ends. Because Elaine's tragedy wasn't just about one woman's death. It was about our fascination with what lies beyond, the line between life, death, and the desperate human desire to control both. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this chilling journey. Elaine Whitmore's story reminds us that no matter how much time passes, truth always finds a way to surface. If this story moved you, help us keep these voices alive. Share your thoughts in the comments. Like this video to help others discover it. Subscribe to our channel and join our growing community of truth seekers and storytellers. And remember, every case we uncover isn't just about death. It's about the fragments of humanity left behind. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and never stop listening to the whispers of the past. For decades, she was a name on a list, a photograph fading in a file. Elaine Whitmore, the woman the world forgot, became more than a victim. She became a symbol of how truth refuses to die. In the end, it wasn't luck or confession that solved her case. It was persistence, science, and a family's refusal to stop believing. Yet even as we close this story, we must ask, how many other freezers, basements, or forgotten rooms still hold their secrets? How many voices are waiting in the dark, frozen by time and silence? Elaine's story reminds us of something powerful. Justice doesn't always come fast, but it does come. And when it does, it melts everything in its path. Thank you for joining us on this chilling journey through obsession, crime, and the cruel patience of time. If this story stayed with you, help us keep the truth alive. Like this video to push it further into the light. Share your thoughts in the comments. We welcome questions, theories, and even criticism. Subscribe to Dark Truth 25 so you never miss the stories that matter, the ones buried in cold files and darker corners. Because here on Dark Truth 25, we believe every mystery has a heartbeat. It just takes the right moment to thaw. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and never stop seeking the truth.